Hey friends, I wanted to share a special invitation with you, our Nothing is Wasted podcast community. I'm sure by now you've seen the power of stories like these in encouraging you along the way in your own difficult valley. You don't have to experience the same pain point to gain insight and healing from stories of others who have walked through painful circumstances and who have found hope. This summer, we want you to partner with us to make even more stories like this one be heard. We believe in not only the power of hearing others' journeys, but also in gathering people together to talk about their stories, as well as learn healing biblical principles in order to know what to do with our pain. That's why we created the Pain to Purpose course for individuals and groups to have a proven path to walk through their pain. I want you to hear what an impact the Pain to Purpose course and all of our other Nothing is Wasted resources are having on my friend, Pastor Damon Howell, and the church that he pastors, the Blended Church in Indianapolis, Indiana. Take a listen to this.
As a pastor, it's also important that I come alongside people, and we actually run the Pain to Purpose program here at the Blended Church, and it has been absolutely incredible to see the lives that have been touched and changed through the program. We've run it multiple times, and I could go on for hours as to the number of people who have been able to identify their pain, work with that pain, work through that pain, and come out on the other side understanding their purpose that God has for them.
Isn't that incredible to hear how God can take our pain and reveal newfound purpose and bring healing? We love hearing stories like Damon's about what God is doing through Nothing is Wasted ministries in churches across the country and even the globe. If you're ready to be a part of this hope-giving campaign, join us by donating any amount at nothingiswasted.com/give hope, and together we can offer healing for many, hope for one. We're looking for 200 individuals who would join with us at a partnership level of $20 a month or more in this Give Hope campaign. So nothingiswasted.com/give hope. Hello, welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. My name is Davey, and I am joined once again. We're back
Davey,
together.
I'm Aubrey, your co-host.
Again, Aubrey.
I've been co-hosting with Eric, and you've been co-hosting with Ken, and we haven't seen each other in a while. So this is like a grand
I'm telling
reunion.
you, it is a great reunion. It's so good to see you again.
too.
It's so good to be able to do this
fun.
with you again. And I'm sure that this is refreshing for all of our listeners. It feels like it's like the OG Nothing is Wasted podcast at this point, isn't it?
I mean, they like Eric and Ken, but definitely in their souls. We're like, where are Aubrey and Davey? Where's the old school?
Oh my goodness. I feel like we need to catch up, right? I feel like I'm like, hey Aubrey, so how's life
we need to
been?
have
What's
a
been
cup of
going
coffee
on with you?
And chat about life one of these days. That sounds good. You got.
Oh my goodness. Well, I know my summer's been busy. Your summer's been busy. There's been so much that has been going on with all of it. And I know you guys are having probably a really busy, hopefully a good summer. I know many of you guys are also going through some difficult things this summer, probably things that you did not foresee going through. You know, when you think about summer time, summer vibes, you think light, airy, refreshing, but so many people are going through difficult pain and grief and suffering right now, even in the midst of this. And so we just want to be here to be hope for you in this.
Yeah, that's so good. We have a really powerful story to share with you today. Jessye and Ryan Wilden. Man, they're out in California, and their life is kind of wild, right? Like they're like snow skier, camper, adventurer type people. You know, they both, like you were just talking about summer. She especially loves the sunshine and the good things of summer, but man, they are a Nothing is Wasted family.
Goodness, are they? Man, right. You know, my interesting connection here, my late wife, Amanda, her dad's side of the family is all from Mount Shasta. So all from that area. I don't think that there was any kind of association. I don't even know if she knows that Jessye, but you know, I was on Jesse's podcast, the Molden Cast, a little while ago. And when we were having this conversation, she just kind of puts these little tidbits in about their story. And at one point I'm like, wait a minute, hold on a second. Can you tell me what you guys have just walked through? And so she tells me, you know, says, yeah, you can go follow these news stories and stuff. And then what they have taken on as a responsibility, you know, with these kids and trying to help them through this grief. So I'm telling you, like, I want
I know
her to
Davey and I are kind of talking around their story because
guys.
we want her to be able to share it with you. But
yes, it's heavy, but it's amazing how she and her husband have stepped into this. And so you're going to hear from both of them in this conversation. If this blesses you, we want for you to rate and review the podcast. Go to Apple Podcasts. Let us know that this really was encouraging to you. Subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss a moment of when we put out some more content that's going to be helpful and hopeful to you. And then go to nothingiswasted.com. We've got a lot of resources there to help you partner with God to take back your story. The man, Jessye and Ryan, they are definitely an example of people who are partnering with God to take back their story and other people's story on behalf of other people.
Yeah.
So why don't you lean in and listen to my conversation right here with Jessye and Ryan Wilden. Well, Jessye and Ryan, it is so great to have you guys joining me on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You know, we were praying right before this, and it occurred to me that while we're recording this, it's super early for you guys. You guys got up nice and early. Man, thank you for doing that, for making this happen. And why don't you tell us a little bit about where, who you are, where you're from. Tell us a little bit about your life right now, because you guys have it's a heartbreaking story that you have experienced and kind of stepped into. And so I want to dive into that because your life now is very indicative of what has taken place. But give us a little bit of the overview of the modern day. This is our life, and then we'll dive back into your story.
Well, we live at the tippy top of California, and we have 5 children. We're a blended family. That's part of our story. So I think what makes us unique is the age range. We have one at the time of this recording that is 21. She's almost 22. Then we have 17-year-old, 2 16-year-olds, and a 5-year-old. So life has a lot of different stages, but I think that as a family, we've gone through a lot of healing and deep conversations. And so I think that has swung us into more joy. And so there is a lot of dancing. The kids love swing dancing with while playing in the kitchen and doing dishes. So there's just an atmosphere and a culture of like a lot of life and a lot of fullness. And so it's a really good life. But I do think it was birthed from the deep, beautiful things of pain. And so
Yeah, and we were talking earlier, I think.
Jessye, you
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, I think that we have.
That's all right. That's all right.
We have two of these things where our blending is not normal, and we were talking earlier about how people, don't being able to relate to other people, and when we, have problems or try to fix something, it's like, oh, let's go to YouTube and watch a video on how to fix something, or let's find a forum where they're talking about what we're going through, and we didn't have that. You look through lots of forums and just our situation doesn't come up a lot. Also, really early, it's great. Wow. I just roll out of bed looking like this. If I were to wake up, an hour earlier, I'd still look like this, so it doesn't really matter. So pretty easy on my end.
This is so true. I got up an hour and a half earlier than him. But I think our day-to-day life, Ryan, he puts in heating systems, and he is like a mechanical genius. He is always fixing things around the house and helping us that way. And then I'm an author and a podcaster, so I think our lives really complement each other really well. But yeah.
Wow. Ryan, I love that you referenced this idea of like when we want to fix something or we want to learn something about something, we go to YouTube and we try to find other people who have been there, done that. I find that I'm all the time trying to find some kind of a hack or a helpful hint on how I can move through whatever it is that I'm going through, whether it's like trying to build a deck on the back of my house or whether it's, trying to figure out what to do with this aspect of our business. And that's so helpful. But you're right. There are so many times we find ourselves in spaces in life where we're going through something that at least it feels like nobody else, there's no way anybody else has been able to go through what we're going through right now. And true, everyone has a very unique and distinct story or elements of it. And at the same time, what I love about what we're doing here is that we're opening up this space for people who perhaps have gone through what you've gone through, and now they're going to be able to derive encouragement and hope from how you guys have walked through it. I'm amazed at even how the outlook that you have right now. Jessye, you said something to the effect of beautiful and heartbreaking or painful, right? It's like this blend of this both and that takes place, and that's what your life now is. It's been birthed out of this place of heartbreak, and yet you guys are doing something really beautiful in it. And so I'd love for you to share with us. Why don't you jump back into the story and share with us what happened, and then we'll kind of talk through some of that.
So about 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago now, we had decided that we were finally going to make the move after 10 years of praying to build our dream house. We had really wanted to move into Mount Shasta, and finally, like miraculously, property became available, and we decided, okay, this is the time. So in order to do that, we sold our home and we moved in with the grandparents. We moved in with Ryan's parents. And so Ryan and I were living in the back of a garage. We kind of built a little 300 square foot space back there. And then our two daughters at the time, who were 16 and 10, would live in the main house with grandma and grandpa. And it was just a temporary situation while we built this house. We ran into all kinds of problems. Nothing went as smoothly as planned. We were there longer than we thought. And just when we think we have life figured out, we think like, okay, this is what we've been planning for and dreaming for. We find out, surprise, I'm pregnant. I have a 10-year-old, a 16-year-old. We're living in a box and I'm pregnant. It's like, so now morning sickness is hitting. I was trying to work a fitness business into life and homeschooling. And it was just kind of like, this is just the worst timing, what felt like the worst timing. But what we really didn't see coming is 2 months later, we lost Ryan's littlest sister and her husband to a suicide homicide event. And that really just flipped everything on its side. We had promised when their two children were born that we would care for them. And so in like what felt like a moment, we went from having 2 children to 5 children, not knowing if we'd ever recover, and then we're all squished in a space that was not made for that. And I think I really wrestled with God's timing and with not even his goodness, but it was like wrestling to find his goodness. And so I think through that, it was hard. We had his littlest sister, who was named Rena, and her husband, Danny. They were incredibly involved in our community. We have a really tight-knit, small town community, and it took everyone, by surprise. And there was so much shock and sorrow and anger. And so not only were we dealing with kind of this, like, how do we tell children these things? How do we walk with children in these things? But also, how do we walk with each other? And then how do we like do this in front of a community that is like aching and hurting? And so we had no manual, just like you were talking about, kind of like we had no way to know what to do. And so we learned just to walk step by step with God and with each other in that. And so it became just like everything that we didn't expect. And so we looked at it, we're like, okay, God, you have to be with us hour for hour. You have to be the one with me, because I've never felt anything like this. I've never had grief like this. They were our best friends. And I think there were no signs that it was coming.
Yeah, I think, when someone asks you if you'll watch their kids or take care of them, you don't ever expect for that actually to happen. It's just kind of one of those, of course we will. And we thought about it, and, it wasn't like a flippant decision. But then when something like that actually happens and you're like, okay, reality just changed. What things look like just changed. You move into this new world of like, yeah, what is the next step not a year down the road or 6 months down the road, but what is the next step tomorrow? And I think, like Jessye said, that's really what we fell into was trusting for daily bread as opposed to my 5-year plan.
Yeah.
Jeez. How in the world do you even begin to sort through emotions in that? I mean, how do you, there's complication. I mean, the loss by suicide is a very complex grief.
Yeah.
But when you add the component of a suicide homicide, and this is someone that is not only a family member of yours, but also a very, very dear friends, right? I mean, because sometimes we can have family members that are not that close to us, right? They're not dear, but everything that is it's so wrapped up in your life and in your. I mean, how do you even begin to wrap your head around what happened? I mean, that's where so many people find themselves, is a space of like the immediate aftermath, and they're going, what just happened, and how do I even find a way through any of this? What was that like for you guys?
I think that, well, I mean, Mike Tyson says it best, right? Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. And going through something like that is really just getting punched in the face. And so when you start the process, it really is like you have, you know, the mixed up cocktail of all the emotions that you can feel all at once. You start with shock, right? How could this happen? And then you work through all of those other stages, you know, like asking, what could have I done? You know, and then you start with the if I's. If I'd only been a little bit closer or only said a few more things or only been more available and all of that stuff. And what we found is you really have to shift out of that, the what ifs or the if I's, because you can only control what's right in front of you. And really that's just an illusion of control anyways. But there's nothing that we could have done, or said. You know, there was lots of great conversations. You know, we didn't hold back I love yous or anything like that. So when you get to the end, you go, this was a tragic thing that we had no control over, and you kind of have to start taking steps from that point, because it's so easy to get lost and stuck in the I want to blame myself for this now.
I think for me, the anchoring thing, especially of that day, was that they were good. Like, I had faith that they both were in heaven. And so I thought about since and seeing other people in grief, because there's all kinds of grief. But I think the sudden tragic ones, and you know this, Davey, have a different like reckoning that you have to have to do inside yourself. And one of the things that I just knew instantly was that with all the things I didn't know, that I did know that they were in heaven, and I knew they were good. And I even knew that that was a good day for them, like now. And that was it was great to be able to, in my mind, almost set that aside. Like, they're good now. Like, I don't know how this happened, why this happened. I don't know if we will ever recover, but I know they're good. So I could set that aside. And that was that was huge. That was huge, a huge comfort, like, behind everything. And then I think God really helped us even right away to be like, don't miss the goodness, because that day, even though it was the worst day in so many ways, there was so much goodness. How the police handled it, how our community handled it, the words that people said, the beauty of how our community came around us, the beauty of like even that they let us into the house right away after, you know, kind of closing the crime scene. They allowed us to go get their blankies and their iPad. And then I was amazed that the kids were alive. And I couldn't stop thanking God for that. It was kind of like, I don't understand any of this, but these are the things I know. And sometimes when the world is swirling suddenly, it's like we have to go back to what we know. And I knew that heaven was real and that they had moved to another neighborhood. And I knew that he was with us. And I knew there was still goodness to find in that day. I could just feel myself needing to look for it, like treasure, like breath. And so even though the shock of that day was so great, and I've never experienced anything like it, I almost feel like there's a capacity inside of us that we can only hold so much grief at a time. And we can only hold so much joy at a time. Sometimes you're like, I want to soak up a moment more because it's so good. And you're like, I can't do it more than I am. But I'm thankful that grief is the same way. It's like you kind of get to capacity and you're just floating on that. And I'm thankful that that God holds a lot of that for us.
Man. Well, and I can't, obviously it's just an incredible miracle and blessing that these kids were safe and alive through the whole thing. And yet at the same time, how old were they at the time of this?
10 and 11.
Okay. So at the same time I'm assuming they experienced something that is, even were they present during all of this? What do you know what was going on there?
Yeah, they were sleeping. It happened at, they think 7 a.m. in the morning. And so the oldest, who is Kieran, she heard the last gunshot. And so she went in and discovered them. And she called Ryan's mom first, which is where we were living. And then we heard the phone ring through. And his mom, Pam, asked her to call 911. So after she called 911, they had her get her little brother. And she really carried that burden. And she got him out of the house, even though there was no danger at that time. They didn't know. And so out in the cold of the morning, October morning is pretty chilly here in Mount Shasta. So without shoes, without anything, they went and waited. They waited for the police to get there, and she kept her brother safe.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. It's a smaller, tight-knit group of people who have gone through something like this traumatic, or witnessed or walked into something that's just horrific, of people that you love. And so my breath is taken away right now with what she had to experience walking into that. I know that when we talk about kids, especially in a public forum like this, we want to be really sensitive because, they're in our care and our protection and our guardianship. As to the degree that you feel comfortable, walk us through a little bit about, walk us through, maybe for the benefit of others who are trying to figure this out with their kids, kids who maybe have experienced something really traumatic, or folks who are fostering or adopting and they bringing kids into their home who have experienced something traumatic. What did you guys do from the outset? How has that journey been? I know that's just an absolutely loaded question, I'm sure. But can you just share with us a little bit, the very beginning, what was your approach? You guys are wrestling through grief yourself. You're trying to make sense of all of this. You're feeling like your world's just been turned upside down, and yet you're also bringing into your care these two kids whose world has been completely shattered. And you're trying to somehow put some pieces back together while you're putting the pieces back together of your own sense of peace in all of this. Talk to me about what that was like. What was your approach with these kids?
I think, the first steps are always like, waking up early in the morning and stumbling around trying to find the light switch. And so a lot of it is just by feel at first. It's you can't see the path. And so pulling them close, making sure that they knew that with all of our power and our strength that they were safe. And we only hold a small portion of that, but as it related to us, that they were safe, and that they were cared for and going to be protected and looked after, I think was probably the very first step. And then after that, we kind of moved into bigger picture things.
Yeah, I think that first day, it really was, a half hour at a time. When they came home, let's see. When they came home, they just went to the couch and watched TV. And so it was like giving them, they didn't have shoes. We gave we got them warm, and there was just not a lot to do. Yeah. They were they needed space to almost zone out for a little while. And I think that was really important.
Yeah.
I think people could see that as unhealthy, but I just think like there's so much to absorb here.
No.
And so I think that was really great. As soon as they let us into the house, we knew that we needed to get their blankies because they were blankie kids when they were little, and their iPads and some clothes for them. And so we were really grateful when that step opened up. And they had their blankies and their iPads. And what was so interesting that particular day is that those iPads acted like force fields, because a lot of people who were not in our inner circle kept dropping by. And because we were sharing a home, the people who were in his parents' inner circle are not necessarily the kids' inner circle. And I noticed that I remember looking at them, and when they were on the iPad, people would leave them alone. And I remember thinking that was such a goodness in itself, which is really strange to say, but it was almost like a force field that when they picked up the iPad, people just didn't bother them. And I was really grateful for that. But I think there was just a lot of shock that day. And we were trying to deal with the steps of, okay, there's going to be a press release. There's going to be, we need to tell our communities, okay. There were so many like practical steps in death especially because it was a crime, there were just all these steps that we needed to do as the adults. And there were a lot of adults. So we were all trying to figure out how to do that while getting an influx of the community coming by and needing to also care for them. I think the hardest moment that hit for me was, how do I tell my kids? Like before Kieran and KK came home, I knew I needed to tell my daughters. And I just remember that being a very, very difficult moment. Like, I don't know the words. Like, I don't know how to do any of this, I don't. And we sat them down on our bed, the same place that 2 months ago we had told them that we were pregnant and that we were adding to our family. And here we are, like, God has allowed our family to be subtracted from. And so there were just these really pivotal moments that are locked in my mind of like, I don't know how to do this, but we did it together. I was really curious how we would handle grief together. But I think the saving thing for us as a whole family was just really allowing space for each other and what grief needed to look like that day. And as a mom and a caretaker, I knew that like the evenings would be the worst, like going to sleep, the nights, because that's kind of when everything gets real quiet. Everyone stops coming by. You aren't on your iPad anymore. And I remember thinking like my job, I want it to be putting good thoughts in their head. And so we pulled out the Chronicles of Narnia and we just started reading. And I wept through every bit. And we would put on good music and we would I would sing them to sleep. And we'd get out in nature a lot. It was a beautiful October. And God was so kind to us that we would just go on walks. And so I think I was thinking with all that is inputting in their brains, like my job was like to help find as much goodness and closeness. And so pulling them close and trying to fill all our minds with as much good and hope as we could. And that became kind of my mission for those first days.
Yeah, I think, like you were saying, the iPads are put away and all that stuff. When we're busy and when we're distracted, it's easy for thoughts not to creep in or reactions not to happen.
Yeah.
And then when you get that quiet time, I know her bedtime routine, putting the kids to bed, was like 2 hours an evening. Yeah. So it wasn't like, tuck you in really quickly. It was, she was going up to put them to bed and I'm like, I'll see you in a couple hours. So it really was that that time and dedication that you put into whatever each kid needed that night.
Yeah.
And for us, it was, not just our, not just our niece and nephew at the time, but our two kids too, our two daughters too. So it was affecting our whole family, even every evening.
And I did pray that.
How did that meld with your?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jessye. Sorry.
Oh, I really did pray, and I really believe God could take away those images that Kieran saw. And so that became my prayer at the beginning, just that it would she wouldn't remember. She just wouldn't remember. And I really believe God can do that. But it took probably, I don't know now, time was such a warp. Isn't that the way it is? It's like when you're in like grief and trauma like that, it's like, it feels like a year. It feels like a day. It's so strange. But so somewhere in there, probably a week or two in, they finally opened up with what happened that morning. And so I do think like there is that idea too, that we need to earn the right to hear. We need to take off our shoes in people's stories, even in children. And people would say that, oh, well, good thing kids are resilient. And I felt that was so dismissive, honestly. And like, they need to choose to move forward just as much as we do, to not be stuck in grief. And to wrestle with all those feelings and all those questions with God and all those questions with like their own lives and their own home. They were wrestling with all of that. And so I think God really helped me see them just as people, not as just like children, like whatever they needed to do for grief was the same as like Ryan and I, like whatever we needed to do for grief, and trying to make space for that and saying, that's okay here. Like if you want to play all day and laugh, there's space for that. Our oldest daughter wanted to go right back to school, and that was hard for me. It was really hard for me, but she was cared for really well there. The school did an amazing job. It was a charter school, and they had meetings with her, made sure how to support her. They told the students what she wanted. Everyone was checking on her, and that was what she wanted to do. She wanted to be doing good. And so it was kind of like making space for everyone in there. But I do think like anybody can be resilient, but just because you're a child does not necessarily mean you automatically are. I think all the work that they have done, it's a great merit to them of like who they are and what they've chosen.
Wow. You bring up a really good point, Jessye, the idea that you have to earn the right for someone to be vulnerable with you, whether it's a child or whether it's an adult. I think there can be times where we almost try to require or demand that people are vulnerable with us if we're going to have real true friendship or relationship with them. And the truth is you have no right to demand that of somebody else. And they have no reason to give that to you unless you've created a safe space for it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important for those of you guys who are listening to this and you're going, how do I help someone in my life, a loved one, a friend, kids, family member who's going through something really difficult? Well, one of the ways you help is not by demanding that they open up to you, but by, as you said, Jessye, taking your shoes off and just, I love that image, like taking your shoes off and just being there with them and earning the right and recognizing it's going to take time. And you don't want them to open up by force. You want them to open up at their own will, by their own volition, because that's where they're really going to be able to come to a place where they're opening these spaces that that the healing salve of the Holy Spirit and your presence as you're carrying the Holy Spirit into that space, that it's going to be able to help to heal in this. So I love that. I love that. Just that thought. That's a really incredible principle, that you have to earn the right for someone to open up and to create space. And I think that's what we're trying to do right here, is encourage people. Hey, create space. Like, give yourself permission in those moments of grief to feel what you're going to feel, and not be burdened by the, oh, you should do this, or this is kind of the requirements for grief. There is no parameters around grief. Yeah.
They, now that they're 16 and 17 too, they want to speak about this. And then so we, they've changed a lot over the last 5.5 years. And because the book is about that time period, you know, a lot of people think that's who they are. And so we actually started a family podcast so that they could speak about it, could say who they are now and how they see everything. And one of the things that they said, and like, what helped you in grief? You know, what was it like? It was exactly what you're saying, Davey. It was that the people who sat with me, who were just still, that just were with me. And I thought, so even with a child, right, a 10-year-old, which takes even almost more discomfort to just sit and to be still and to be available. I thought all we can do is be available as an invitation to be like, whatever you need, if you want to talk, if you want to cry, if you want to scream, if you want to laugh. And I noticed in our home that I learned so much from grief from all of our children, because they have a very different rhythm of grief than adults do. It's kind of like if in the morning they're crying, they're on their face, I'm stroking their hair. I'm like, in my mind, I think the day's gone. We need to cancel everything. But I noticed that 20 minutes later, it would turn into a pillow fight. And they'd be chasing each other around laughing. And then they'd tell a story and we'd eat breakfast and we'd go on our day. And it was such a strange thing because I think as adults, we feel that would be disingenuous. Like if I were to cry my heart out in front of you and then suddenly be like, you know, towel snap you, you'd be like, you know, what the heck? You know, but what I notice is that, you know, life is really made up of those moments. And a lot of times my oldest daughter, Katrina, believes that we can't actually have a completely 100% bad day, that there's always going to be something, there's going to be something good, even if it's really small. And so it's actually really funny because we have, we're almost like sometimes rooting that'll be a bad day. So we could just really relish in it. You know, like, oh, we're almost there. It's like, I'm going to bed at 9 p.m. and we're at 7:30 and it's been a rotten, horrible day. And then that one friend will call and you're like, darn it. You just, you know, like, but it is like this idea that
you ruined
my bad day. But it is this idea that, the rhythm of grief, I think, is actually much more fluid than but because we don't, you know, because we know people are watching us and stuff, we almost don't allow ourselves that. So in our house, because of what they taught us, it was like, everybody kind of knew, like, if you're crying right now, we'll be with you. But then if you're done, we're done. Like, we move on. Or if we're laughing and singing, like, that was as welcome as the hard stuff.
Yeah, I think as adults, we kind of get locked into this. Like, this is the process, right? We're sad, we're sad, we're sad. We're less sad, we're less sad, we're less sad. We're okay. And then, you know, down the road, we can be happy again. Almost like we're showing disrespect to the situation if we're happy too soon or something like that. But one thing that I learned and we learned from our kids was that grief is not that rhythm. It's not, I'm sad, I'm sad, I'm sad, you know, slowly working out of it. It's I'm sad. I'm having a moment where I'm reminiscing or I'm struggling or whatever. And the next moment can be like, I'm full of joy because right now my life is really good and things that are going on in my life are really good. And that's okay too. You know, it's learning that the rhythm doesn't have to be this long drawn out, you know. It's the saying, was it a bad day or was it a bad 5 minutes that ruined your whole day, you know, or that you let ruin your whole day? And I think kids are really good at just not letting that 5 minutes ruin their whole day, but being present in each moment, you know, whether it's happy or sad or contemplative.
It's so rich and so insightful. I mean, I just, as you were explaining that, I kept thinking about Jesus saying, unless you come to me like one of these, speaking of the children, right? That there's a childlike faith, and there's a childlike faith that gets imposed into the grief process. And I think we can learn so much from what you guys have observed in how your kids and your adopted kids have walked in this grief journey. It's so inspiring because, I mean, I feel like what you just shared with us is something that we all really need to wrestle with and understand that it is okay to, in one moment, feel the depths of sorrow, and in the next moment, feel this joy, that doesn't make sense, but to have fun and to laugh and we don't have to feel guilty about that. We're not boxed into a certain way of grieving. And then that helps us to have empathy for others, that we can't superimpose how we would walk through something onto someone else's life and how they're walking through something. You know, there's no one right way to walk through grief, is something that we say often here. There are some wrong ways to walk through it in the sense of, right? Like you can absolutely create a destructive pattern in your life by not leaning into the Lord in these emotions, by trying to find other things to cope with or to numb the pain. But as you're leaning into the Lord and you're experiencing all of these emotions, the gamut of them, the highs and the lows, man, there is no one right way to walk through that. And I just think that's so insightful. Thanks for sharing that with us, because I think every single one of us need to really think about that in terms of how we're walking through our own. You know, I found in everybody's story, there seems to be some element of forgiveness that also emerges, or having to wrestle through that. I'm curious if that's been your experience as well. Is there an element of forgiveness that you guys have had to walk through, or you've had to help your kids walk through, and if so, what's that been like?
Yeah, that's always a part of, like, when you feel wronged, or you've been wronged, or, you know, in a terrible situation like this where you feel like you've been stolen from, is that realization. I think God just really blessed me with having perspective quickly. I don't think it's everyone's perspective, and I wouldn't put it on everybody, but I just really realized that, you know, when the Bible talks about murder, and in the New Testament, when Jesus is talking about murder, it's like, have you hated someone in your heart? You know, have you, you know, you're guilty of murder. And that realization came to me early on in the process, where I was able to say, like, I'm the same. You know, there's sameness between me and Danny. You know, my brother, my good friend, we are the same. And but for the grace of God, you know, I'm not the one that is in this situation right now, or was in that situation then. And to be able to accept and realize that, for me, like I said, it was a blessing that I was able to come to that realization and be able to shift that quickly to that. And I think it allowed me to be able to come alongside the rest of my family, so that I wasn't still struggling with that part of it, but to be able to come alongside my family and be there for their support.
Yeah, I never read that verse the same after he said that. We had a community very angry at Danny, and I remember not understanding it because one of the reasons we wrote the book was because of one particular story. We have a graffiti bridge. It's like a cement, like, encased bridge that trains migrate across and cars go under. And it's kind of become a social media platform of graffiti. You know, it's like, you know, go Carol if she has cancer, or go team, or we hate Trump, you know, whatever. It's like all over it, plastered over. And in grief and sorrow, Danny and Rena's names were written beautifully on that bridge. But in the middle of the night, someone would come every night and cross out Danny's name, leaving Rena's. And so in black, they would just spray paint over it. And because I lived with Ryan's parents, his mom, Pam, I would catch her, because I had morning sickness. I would go in early, try to get some protein. And I would catch her grabbing paint and going and painting his name back in color every morning, so that when those kids drove under, they would see his name. And I always wondered if people noticed that it was like rotating in color, you know. But the person who had killed her daughter was her son. And that love surpassed everything. And so, I mean, that happened for weeks. It was actually quite torturous. Yeah. And so we don't know who crossed out that name, but on social media, it actually sounded a lot the same. I think people didn't want us to have a joint memorial. They didn't want him to be remembered. And I remember us having a conversation. I was like, why did they think that? Like, they realize he's not here, right? I'm like, he's not here to, reprimand or like make this right. Like, his kids are here, we're here. And I remember just being like, what is this? And Ryan really, I think, he has a gift of discernment. And in that moment, he really taught me that they just want justice. Like, sometimes we just want justice. We don't want this to happen again. And fear was this zinging. And so how do we control this? And I think a lot of people just out of a place of fear and didn't want that to happen again. And they thought, if we can make this an example, if we can say, we're not going to grieve, we're not going to, we're not going to celebrate him in any way, maybe that will help the next person. And so God gave us a lot of empathy to be able to translate what was happening in our community. And that's really how we started having talks about if we were angry, because there was so much anger. Our kids have had differing things that they work through, but I don't think anybody holds any anger now. But I think watching Pam's forgiveness changed my whole life. Just watching someone love so quietly and so strongly in color. And I think it really has taught me a lot about the messages that we sent, and the ways that we cross out people's name in color, or in black, and then we can write them back in color. And I thought, we don't really have a lot of control over the messages out there and the things that get crossed out and the people who even try to cross us out. But we have control of what we write and how we paint names in color. And so I think that's become an anthem of our life, is how do we even paint Danny and Rena's name in color? Because we're not our worst decision. I think for me, Ryan pulled from like God's word in how to forgive and how to find sameness and empathy. For me, it was almost easier, I feel, because I had a suicidal experience when I was 16. And it was because of a sexual abuse situation that had happened, and I hadn't told anybody. And so a lot of, my empathy came from actually being in that position. And I really think that people who are suicidal, which there's so many more than we realize, just doing some suicide awareness stuff, I've just been shocked by how many people have been 1 second away, 1 day away, 1 hour away from taking their own life. And you don't know, like, you don't realize that they had that. And I was one of those. But so I think for my experience, it's not because you want to die. It's because you are if you picture it like a building, like a flame, like you're up stories high and the building is on fire and there's a window, and you would never want to jump out that window. You would never look at that window that way. But because everything, the floor, your clothes, everything's on fire, you think that there's relief. That's how I escape this burning life of mine. And so it's not that I think people are like, they're so selfish to want to die, and I'm like, I think it's just, we're desperate and we're hurting. And so because I knew that in myself, I could understand some of that mental illness that would make you think that that's the only way. And I would say to anybody listening to this, if you feel like your life is on fire and you're looking at that window, tell someone. I didn't tell anyone, and I could have been the same. I could have ended up in heaven that day. But what happened and no one would have known why. I think that's a really important part, because I think a lot of people were like, what were the signs? And then they started creating signs. They're like, oh, that must have been a sign. I saw Rena crying, weeks ago, and that must have been it. I mean, everybody started pulling like these symptoms to be the signs. And that was really painful, because it's almost like, well, I didn't see any signs and I was in their day-to-day life. I mean, it was very painful that people thought that there should be signs. And even when I wrote my book, my editor said, what were the signs? And so I really had to grapple with that. But I thought, sometimes there just aren't signs. And with my own story, I knew that if I had died, no one knew about the abuse that had happened. No one knew about all the things that I was thinking and stuff. And it gave me a lot of comfort that we don't have to know everything. And we may never know everything. And so trying to say, what is mine? What do I hold? and then what is God's that he holds, was really a place that I could come to peace. And so for me, that empathy carried me through, and I don't think I was ever angry, but I missed them, and I wish that he had stayed. I wish she had stayed.
It's really amazing how both of you guys, coming at it from two different perspectives, came to the same place. You know, for you, kind of this, in some ways, shared experience, Jessye, where you're going, okay, I have empathy because I understand in some ways how he felt. And then Ryan, for you to say that, to find that sameness, right, in our humanity, and saying that the sin that existed in him that resulted in this is the same sin that exists in me. That it exists in all of us. And I mean, that's the parable of the unmerciful servant is a perfect example of someone who didn't recognize that sameness. And I think that is a huge part of beginning to understand how to release that bitterness, to come to peace with things, especially when you felt like that there has been some kind of perpetration against you, and against people that you love. And it is a beautiful thing, the way that you guys have each approached that. You know, Jessye, I was going to ask you guys, what was the inspiration behind your book? But what an amazing, beautiful picture of what it looks like to, not from a spinster perspective, not from a PR perspective, but from an absolutely true kingdom perspective, to say you're not defined by the last or worst decision that you've ever made.
That's exactly
that Jesus has never looked at us in those moments and defined us in that way. But we can, not only can we write over the blight of our lives and our stories with color by the cross and the empty tomb, but we can also be that for other people as well. And I mean, it's an amazing picture of you guys just being people that embody the kingdom of God. This is what the kingdom of God is all about, as agents of reconciliation, where we go, you know what, I understand you want justice. I understand that we all are wired with that. That's part of the Imago Dei. But at the end of the day, like, justice is in God's hands, and we can be at peace with that.
Yeah, that's it.
You know, there's some things that we don't get to talk about a whole lot that I'd love for you guys to share, and this kind of pivots a little bit, but you know, this was obviously something that was melded very much into your own personal grief. And while you're grieving, you're helping these kids to grieve. You're helping to sort through so many different things. You've got this out-facing community that is also affected by this. And so you're in some ways trying to get ahead of the story from a media perspective. You're trying to help, you know, guard and protect these kids, as well as you're guarding and protecting your friends that you've just lost, and you're trying to help people see Jesus. I can very much relate to that. But also at the same time, there's just some administrative things that had to take place. And we often tell people, hey, when you've lost someone that you loved, maybe, you know, take a break from making some really big decisions. You guys didn't have that luxury. You had to make some really big decisions. You had to go through several different administrative, legal proceedings, like all kinds of stuff that were coming at you at once. Talk to me about some of those things, like help to shed some light on that for those who are listening, so we can understand the full picture of what kinds of decisions you guys had to make. And then maybe in that, help us understand how you made those decisions. You know, how do you walk about making huge decisions in the midst of grief, but still be wise about it?
We, you know, we had a good community. We had a good tribe around us. So, you know, definitely a blessing for that. We, you know, it's the trying to get into their, you know, their banks to see what they, you know, their bills are, their assets are, all of that stuff, trying to communicate like with the funeral home, because you can't do a lot of things until you have a death certificate. And so trying to get a hold of that and have lots of copies so that you could send it off to, you know, credit cards and landlords and all of those things. You know, I think the trap could have been easily just to try and take it on by ourselves, and not ask for help or lean on help, or some of this wasn't even put on our plate because of the people that were around us. They just took it. We didn't even have to make some of those like minute by minute decisions. We had family meetings where we talked about a lot of this stuff, moving forward. And then, then it's okay. The kids, because of our community being small, we probably, the kids never had to go like into foster care temporarily or whatever. They were in the care of family. And so our county was really happy with that. And then making that official, trying to work out through the court process. And we were very, very blessed again by our community just encircling us and having a lawyer saying, I'll take care of this paperwork for you and make it happen. So we didn't have to worry about that. But yeah, finding a good tribe and reaching out, because I think that is one of the things that when you're struggling, whether it's, with the thoughts of suicide or just in your day-to-day life, we get very proud. We decide that we can handle it, or we don't want to burden someone else. But being able to reach out and say, hey, we need help with this, or, this is not my expertise, but this is yours. Could you, maybe help me with this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was just choosing what was most important that day.
Yeah.
And for me, caring for children was definitely, I felt what God wanted me to do first. And then Ryan, we were also building our house at that time. So Ryan's would go to work in the day, and then he would go work on the house until he would almost drop.
Man.
And like he said, he had a best friend come every night and be with him.
Yeah.
And so sometimes just people can come and just be with you, and that would keep him working, and so every night someone would be with him. And then for me, people would offer to take the kids for some hours, and I didn't feel that was what they needed. I felt they needed to be close, and so I think the boundaries of that were the first thing. And it's true, there's kind of like there's a waiting period. I would say to anybody who does a will, like, put all your passwords in the will. That was very frustrating to the kids that they no longer could get into any of their accounts. There was a lot of like moments of grief in like, we have to wipe your
iPad.
Yeah.
We can't get into your game because we don't know the password.
There were so many moments of grief like that. And then a lot of things you can't do until you get death certificates. So you can't see what's in their bank, and so I think that really comes down to those hard decisions of planning. Like, if you had an executor, things can go a lot quicker. I think if there's a legal paperwork there, and we couldn't find their will. We do know they made one, but we never found it. And so to make sure you have copies of that, I mean, they're kind of all the conversations you don't want to have, but I think what becomes so burdensome and makes those decisions a lot harder is because you have to kind of fight to even get the information and prove that they no longer can do that. And so there was a lot of stress in that, from taxes to bills to paying for a dance studio to paying, like, figuring out how to move their stuff out of the condo. I mean, and so I think it's kind of making a list of what do I need to do that needs my touch, that needs me. And then what are the anything else, like, you pray that God will bring people to help to divvy that out, like helping move their stuff out into storage units was something that a dear friend of mine took on. It was a huge job. And I'll never stop being thankful for people who did things like that. But then there were other things where it needed to be me, and so I think just kind of sifting that in your mind really helps. But there is a huge decision fatigue that happens in grief. Like, my mind would stop kind of almost working. Like, I felt like I couldn't actually make decision of what I wanted to eat at night, like I couldn't figure out like those steps. And I thought that is a real part of grief that we don't talk about very much.
Yeah. No food in the kitchen, only ingredients.
Oh yeah. If there were just ingredients, I almost would. But I was pregnant, so I was trying to eat. But And then a lot of people brought food. I think that was, so many casseroles, so many casseroles. But the problem is that all kind of started rotting at some point. So I think even just being able to have a grief point person would have been really good, to have someone say, call them, they'll talk to us, and we could say the fridge needs to be cleaned out, and someone can come clean out the fridge without me having to entertain them, interact, or talk about this hard thing right now. And so I would say, if we were, as we're learning more, I thought, wow, a grief point person should be like a wedding coordinator. It should be like a thing that we all do. Like, who's going to be the grief point person? And then they can field all that emotion, as a filter between the most impacted and the community.
Yeah, and maybe even just trying to find that person, someone in your inner circle that you already trust. I mean, it can't be just like, I looked them up in the yellow pages. That just doesn't work.
Not the same as a wedding coordinator.
Because grief is just so much more complicated and hard.
And,
being able to empathize and know you and know, where you're at. So, I totally agree. And being able to set up things, because our community it's like, how can we help? Well, food. Well, if you get 20 casseroles in one day, that works good for about 4 days. And then you just have way too much, sitting there. And, if you had someone coordinating, they could set up, a meal train or whatever that would take care of those immediate needs. When decision fatigue gets hard, it's like, I don't have to decide dinner tonight.
Yeah. And it's a real blessing when people took care of even people who were taking care of us. Because I do notice, and I mean, I see it all the time, and I'm sure I've done it, but it's almost like the person visiting you really needs it for themselves, because they're hurting. And so to see you and do something good would be kind to themselves, to be like, and so sometimes people stay a bit too long. I'm sure you've experienced that, or they kind of drape on you with a really way too long hug or something. And so I think really, if you don't know the directly impacted, maybe just looking around going but I know their best friend, and I could take care of that best friend, and then they could pour in, I bring them dinner and they go over and, and so I think it's kind of like this idea of if you can't, not everybody can pour into the same people on the same day, honestly. And then to know that I have found that grief often takes a steep dive after the memorial. It's almost like there's so much going on to plan and to put that on. And so I think in your mind to think, okay, I'll be second wave, I'll be second wave. I'll bring meals in at week 3.
That's right.
When things really, really start to feel empty and hollow and
That's
lonely.
Right.
And so those are the things I would say.
That's great. That's so good. Jessye, you've written this incredible book. It's a memoir called We Wrote Your Name in Color. And we're going to make sure that everybody can access that pretty easily right there on the show notes, also on the podcast page there on the website. I'm curious, though, for each of you guys, as we close the conversation down, what is, and this, this is a pretty general question, but when you go through something like this, there's no way that you don't, actually, Jessye, I think you asked me this question when I was on your podcast. Maybe I'm mistaken or not, but, and I remember going, that's a lot. We could sit and talk about this for hours, but I'm curious, what is something really significant that the Lord has taught you about himself in this whole process?
That's a good question.
Go ahead.
I think for me, it's witness. It's him being with us. That Emmanuel side of God. I think there's just so much I don't know. And sometimes we need, you and I have talked about this, Davey, that we just need to lay down what we don't know and the what ifs and and so I thought what I have learned of God is that, and really of Jesus, is that he will walk with me. And so I think if you don't know Jesus, I'm like, all it takes is just asking him. And if you do, just waiting on him to kind of grab your hand and walk with you. And I can feel how shallow that sounds, but it's just so I can feel how deep that is in me in the moments that I've walked. Because I think there's certain pains that no one's going to be able to carry with you. Like even as Ryan and I are so close, but there's just some things that we can't touch in each other, and we can't soothe in each other, and we can't heal. And so to know like that God is a God who weeps with us, who hears us, and who really is a comfort. I think that all sounds like ideology, you know, until you really touch it.
And you need it, right?
Yeah, until it's really the only thing that can be a salve on those deepest wounds. And so I think the thing that I struggle with is like not knowing so much, but I thought there is one thing I know, and that he will walk with you.
Wow.
I like her answer. I should have gone first.
And what about yourself?
I think that it's that leap of faith that you can't grasp until you actually leap. You know, you don't understand it. You can have the head knowledge, but the heart knowledge doesn't become real until you're flying in the air and you're like, no, I have, nothing to save me except for you. And so I think that being able to lean into that may be the greatest gift from this whole situation, is being able to understand and grasp that, with both hands, which is, it sucks that it's a terrible situation that makes these things available to us.
Right.
But it is, one of the blessings that comes out of it for sure, that you have that opportunity to grab on with both hands and say, okay, God, I'm here for the ride. I know you'll take care of me. And then looking back in hindsight, which is always the best way to find out how dumb you were or how smart you were, is that he was there walking and holding us the whole time, through that whole process. And so the retrospect of all of that is really, I think, where the biggest blessing from that comes.
Can I add on there too? I think,
yes, please do.
I think about the Israelites in the wilderness, and they just keep thinking they're going to die. And I think that was me. I just thought, I'm not going to make it. Like, I'm not going to make it through this day. I'm not going to make it through this grief. I'm not going to make it through this conversation. And I just think like how he started supplying them with manna. Like there was always enough for that day. And so that became my prayer, is like, I just need today. I just need today. Yeah. And I think like, and nothing would keep until tomorrow. It's like I would run out of strength just in time, and so I think like anybody who is walking through something really difficult, just ask for that manna. Just ask for that manna, and just try to have the faith to say, you'll give me what I need today. And I don't have what I need for tomorrow. I don't have what I need for that other person's story, because sometimes people, I know this happens to you all the time, Davey, they're like, well, I'm not like you, or this didn't happen like you. I'm like, no, because you're not me. Like God does not supply us with what we need until it's time. So to look into someone else's story, or to look into the future that you're not there yet, you don't have the tools that you need. You don't have the manna that you're going to be supplied with. And so I think just for anybody, and I still think that some days now, there's a really hard day, or I'm in the middle of something, I think I'm going to run out of strength. I'm going to run out of energy. I'm going to run out of words, whatever it is. And I'm like, but you are the daily bread, and you'll give me just what I need. And so that would be my thing to anyone. And a day is enough. A day is enough. Just look at that day.
That's what's so beautiful. I think we get so much encouragement from other people's stories. I mean, I've gotten so much encouragement from your story, and yet I can't understand how exactly you're feeling in this, because I haven't walked through it. Yeah. And I think what's beautiful about God is, he even said, I am. So that means I am going to be everything that you need in that moment. You can just trust me, as you've said, Jessye, with your manna, with your daily bread. I can be trusted with this. And there's just a level of peace that we can walk with in that. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to know, no matter what I go through, no matter how horrific it might be, God's going to be there with me.
Yeah.
He promises that. And he's going to be my supply. He's going to be exactly what I need in those moments.
Yeah.
And so, guys, we're so grateful that you would take some time to share with us in this and share so vulnerably. Jessye, you guys have started a podcast. It's called the Molden Cast podcast, right?
Yeah.
And you have a lot of great interviews with your friends, family members. I've even seen just some interviews with some of the kids to see how they're processing through this, which I just think is so great that you're getting them to talk about this and they're processing it out loud and they're getting an opportunity to minister to people who are listening, even through their own grief. So we want to make sure that folks tune into that podcast. And then we also want to make sure that they pick up We Wrote Your Name in Color. And so we'll put links right there. Very easy for you guys to access if you're listening to this, you're watching it on YouTube. But guys, thanks so much for joining us. How else can we follow along in your journey?
Oh, well, her social media.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. You can find me. You can reach out to me. But yeah, thank you, Davey, for having us on.
That's
this has
awesome.
been so meaningful, so special.
Yeah, we really appreciate it and really appreciate the work that you're
thank you,
doing,
guys.
trying to create space for all of that.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's interesting about them is, and I got this impression the first moment I had a conversation with Jessye, it was like, if you didn't know, like you would have no idea that she'd walked through this. I mean, just bright,
Yes.
cheery, hopeful,
Right.
glass half full kind of person.
Yeah.
And you just see the love of Jesus all over her. And I'm like, man, the stuff that you guys have walked through, like you would think that you would be downcast, forlorn, but no, she just radiates.
There is something about, and our friend here at Nothing is Wasted, Ken Roberts, talks about this. Like, there is something about how people who have been through the wilderness, the cave, the whatever dark night of the soul, whatever language you want to use, where like God does emptying, but then God does an exchange of like refilling.
Yeah.
And those people, like I would rather sit under somebody who has known deep, deep pain.
Yeah.
But has like earned the gravitas and the resilience, because I know there is like the Spirit of God has filled them and empowered them in a unique, mysterious way, a beautiful way. And so it is, it's like not what you totally expect, which means it must be from God, but you're totally right. Like there is something about her countenance and her joy that you're like, this is only a filling of the Spirit of God right here.
That's right. And I think we work with so many people who have found themselves in the dark night of the soul. You're listening to this, you're watching this, you found yourself in that.
Yeah.
And I see a convergence happen in their lives where either they stay there, they get stuck, they're like, they kind of hit that bottom and they stay in that bottom.
Yeah.
Or there is this, for whatever reason, and sometimes, sometimes there's not really a formula for this by any means, but they're positioned to receive this filling of the Holy Spirit and this kind of bounce back in a lot of ways. And that sounds very trite to say it that way, a bounce back, but that's all I saw in my head was this graph of like getting sucked into this vortex, but then this like amazing kind of bounce back where you see even more of the joy of the Lord on their face than prior to that.
It's so true.
And sometimes I have trouble placing what that is. I mean, even though we built an entire framework with Pain to Purpose to try to help you, sometimes I have trouble. I'm like, there's an element of this that is the mystery that like where you really are only going to receive. It's a grace that is given to you.
That's what I was just thinking. It's grace.
It's not like you can't force it or there's just like all right, Lord, I'm going to let you take me on this journey all the way to the bottom.
Yes.
All the way back to the top.
Yeah. Yeah. An image that comes to mind is, do you remember those when you were a kid in like elementary school and all the other kids would sit around in a circle and you'd hold that parachute and you would just like throw these balls in the air. Like if you like multiply that, how like deep and low it could go, right? But then flipping up and
they can,
yeah, there is something about like you get as low as you can in that dark place, and then God, I don't know. It's a mystery. It's the grace of God. They certainly have out of their own pain and misery. In that picture of like the grace and the gravitas, poured that out into the kids that they are taking care of.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Which what an amazing, noble thing, and a really heavy endeavor. I'm sure, you know, as you talk to them, they're like, well, what else? I mean,
what else are you going to do?
Right? Of course we would do this. Why wouldn't, you know, who else is going to take this responsibility? So it wasn't even a second thought to them. But, you know, I just had a conversation this morning with a guy who they adopted kids, and you know, now they're years after their adoption, they've experienced in these kids that they adopted, they had so much trauma that early on, I mean, even at the age of 7, they began trying to do everything they can to look at pornography. They're doing everything they can to, you know, and so there's like been this buildup over years and years, no matter how loving of a home this is, that my friend creates for them.
Yeah.
They've seen this, you know, deterioration because of the trauma in this now 15-year-old boy's life. And it has gotten so bad that they're trying to figure out, like, how do we need to do like an outpatient kind of thing.
Wow.
You know, there's been the law involved with it. So it's just a very my point is, when I told him, I was like, you know, when you look at these noble endeavors to adopt someone out of trauma, you go, we're going to be kind of the savior of this, of this young person's life. We're going to be, but nobody tells you about like how difficult that road's going to be, and that you might not even see the redemption on this side of things. Right?
Yeah, that's so true. Like, I have a very good friend who adopted a young boy when he was, I guess, 4, and he's now, I think, 20. And their journey has been so painful, to the point where a couple years ago, she just had to release him. Like, he wanted to be on his own. He wanted to do his own thing. It wasn't good, wasn't following Jesus, was dark and scary. And she just had to go, okay, I release you. And I mean, there are stories of people who, I think this is horrible, but I don't want to be judgmental because of what you're talking about. Stories of people who've said this was a mistake and have tried to, quote unquote, return a child they've adopted, which is, I mean, you know, that's a whole other conversation. But all that to say, you're right, that I think we go into this concept of adoption with like, I'm going to be the savior and it's going to be beautiful. And it is. It is.
It's an unbelievable, I don't think there's another type of journey that we can step into that rivals what we experience in terms of God adopting us into sonship and daughtership, right?
That's right.
It gives us an unbelievable picture of the gospel. And yet at the same time, oh my goodness, especially adopting out of trauma. There's just not a whole lot of preparation for that.
So hard.
And you know, it's your empathy meter goes way up when you're in that, and when you have experienced that, and you're surrounded by other people who are in it. And that's why I think, like, you know, probably Aubrey, if you had said, yeah, some friends of ours adopted and they had to quote unquote give that child back, prior to having walked with some families who are wrestling with that stuff, I would have looked at that probably in a very judgmental way.
Same, totally.
And I think there's a lot of people, just to be frank, because I have these conversations with people who are wrestling with these very things, and they're hearing voices from outside of their situation who are criticizing them, judging them, and they're going, you have no idea. Like, you have no idea just the lack of safety that we feel in certain situations that we're in. You know, of course, you know, we weren't hearing this from Jessye and Ryan by any means, but this just kind of this in compilation with the conversation I had earlier this morning. It's like you just don't know what other people are going through. And so I think that, you know, first of all, if someone in your life has taken on that kind of endeavor, what a noble thing to say, you know what, I'm going to step up for somebody in this life.
Right.
Then we should be nothing but supportive.
Supportive. That's what I was just thinking. Like, I'm even like going through people like moms in my mind who've adopted. Am I supporting them enough? Am I supporting? Like, that should be a call to all of us. How can we support the families that have adopted? Yeah. Fostered. And especially out of trauma, Yeah.
It's very amazing to me, Aubrey, how trauma affects, the more and more that we get into how trauma affects at an early age kids' lives.
I know.
You know, we've been on this journey. We've been on a journey with Weston, and it was things that we didn't even know would affect him that is affecting him, you know, and it's been an incredible thing to see what God's doing to, you know, as he's learning to grieve in his own time. He's about to be 9 at the time of this recording. And so
unbelievable.
He's learning to grieve in certain spaces and phases, but you know, just a really cool thing. And I don't think he or Christy or anybody would mind me sharing this. A couple of weeks ago, we were at a conference, down in Miami, and there was a kids conference that was a part of this, and he went to this kids conference. Saturday night of that kids conference, he gave his life to the Lord.
Come on!
So he prays to receive Christ. We're in the car, we pick him up, we take him, right? And it was, you know, up to this point, we're just, you know, like we're trying to walk with a kid who lost his mom at 15 months old, and we're trying, and you see the critical 0 to 3 when, you know, that is just a pivotal time for stability and you know, rhythms in life and all that. And so we're learning this as we're consulting other therapists and doctors and trying to figure out how do we help him to just thrive through all this. Well, he gives his life to the Lord this Saturday night. I'm asking him questions on the drive home, trying to see, you know, you don't.
I know what you're gonna. Yeah.
You know, he's 8. I gave my life to the Lord when I was 8 years old. So but I want to make sure I want to know it's genuine from him. Like, so I'm asking him questions like, well, did you get emotional? Did you like what kinds of responses? Not that emotion is necessarily evidence of it, but I'm just trying to see what kinds of, how did you feel about this? How did you respond? What? And he was like, no. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, we get back to the hotel room. Christy's putting Cohen to bed, and Weston comes up to me and goes, Daddy, I did get emotional. I'm sorry. I didn't tell you. And I'm like, well, what was it about? He said, well, the guy who prayed with me to receive Christ after, he said, what else can I pray for you about? And he said, immediately I thought about my family. And I thought about Mommy Amanda. And he couldn't even get this out of his mouth. And he starts just weeping, Aubrey, weeping.
Oh, Davey. Oh.
And so this is the first time he's done this, like where he's really just had this like huge emotional release. And I just grab him and it felt like for 15 minutes, I'm just holding him. And he's crying and crying and crying. And he doesn't know how to put words to, you know, so there wasn't a whole lot of conversation there. It was just, and there didn't need to be.
Right. That's what I was just thinking. Oh.
But what my point is that, you know, here's a kid who at 15 months old lost his mom in such a violent and horrific way.
Yeah.
He didn't experience it. You know, he didn't experience it firsthand in a cognitive way, the way that these kids that Jessye and Ryan adopted. But it's held on in his body. It is held on to, and he is experiencing it in new waves as he's grappling with the reality of it, right?
Yeah.
And so all that is to say is, I think we underestimate how much of an impact trauma has on kids, especially.
We absolutely do. Because I think we think they forget. They don't remember. They forget. Like I hear that a lot.
Fine.
They don't remember when their
remember
mom.
that.
They don't remember when their mom was an alcoholic abusing them because they were only. Well, just like you just said, the body keeps the score. Right. The heart keeps the score. The soul keeps the score. And I do think the kindness of God is that he like allows little ones to remember as they're able to. But the hard part is when some of that stuff goes unaddressed because we just, as adults, assume they're fine. Oh, they don't remember. They don't.
Yep.
You know, and there's research on this, right? There's even like birth in the womb trauma.
Yeah.
That the Lord has to meet and heal. And we have to be aware of that as like caretakers in precious little ones' lives.
If I'm going to turn this into a little bit of a prophetic instructive kind of thing, I know I just told a story. I would say this. There's no reason for us to like put or presuppose trauma on somebody, right? No reason to create that or, you know, like, oh, well, you know, we got to.
Right.
But I also would say there's probably someone who's going like, they're fine. I would do the hard work now early on and dig in. You there are in many cases that I wish that we had a little bit more understanding of what to do with Weston, at 3 years old, 4 years old.
Wow.
He's he's thriving. He's great. Like, he's incredible.
Yeah, right.
But they're just things where I'm like, oh man, if we had kind of addressed this a little bit earlier, think about how much better he could be. And then I hear stories of friends of mine who they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to. And so now you're 15, 16, 17, 18 years old.
Yeah.
And the decisions they're making at that scale, when they saw it back when they were 3 or 4 years old, it is now just exacerbated. And so early on. Maybe that's just a prophetic instructive word for somebody who's listening to this.
Good. Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Well, one of the things that we're so passionate here about Nothing is Wasted is these stories, these conversations, and really empowering you, equipping you with all kinds of resources to help you walk through your pain story.
Yeah.
And because of that, we'd love to invite you to go to our community platform, check it out, our Community Plus platform. We've got coaching, we've got mini courses, we've got content, we've people to walk beside you in, that are also walking with kids in their own grief. We'd love to invite you to go to nothingiswasted.com/community to find out more about all we have to offer for you here at Nothing is Wasted.
That's right. And we want to thank Sleeping at Last for providing all the music for the Nothing is Wasted podcast. You can download his music anywhere music can be downloaded or streamed if you want to stream it. I don't know if anybody downloads music anymore. I think we
good point.
Does anybody download music? You remember back in the day when you would download from Napster or from LimeWire and you would make your mixtape
your own
CD?
your own playlist. I remember, Davey, I'm older than you. I remember listening to the radio, waiting for my favorite song to come on and pressing play record on my tape.
Come on. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my
Good
goodness.
times.
So
Good
make sure
times.
you go and check out Sleeping at Last. You can follow us at Nothing is Wasted Ministries. Follow me at Davey Blackburn. You can follow Aubrey at AubSamp. And next week we have a wonderful conversation with Carrie Garcia. She actually did a masterclass for us a little while back. So those of you guys who attended that masterclass, by the way, our masterclasses, we're starting those back up this fall. You can attend those live for free. You can watch all the replays on our Community Plus membership if you want to join Community Plus. And speaking of that, we are in the middle of this Give Hope campaign where we're looking for 200 people who would step up and say, hey, I'll give at least $20 a month or more to Nothing is Wasted Ministries. As a benefit of that, you get access to all the Community Plus.
It's awesome.
All that content. So if you commit to giving $20 a month or more, you can get access to all the Community Plus stuff. So that means previous masterclasses, live coaching, bonus episodes, mini courses, all the stuff that we have right there in Community Plus. But in the meantime, until we hear from Carrie Garcia herself next week, go ahead and listen to this little clip from my conversation with Carrie Garcia.
I think it's important if you're sitting and listening to this. I could tell you about my personal experience, but let's broaden the lens a little bit more, just so that this feels applicable to everyone. Here's the truth.
Yeah.
Look for places in your life where there is either contempt or hatred towards yourself or contempt or hatred towards others. This is the outcome. These two areas are the outcome of untended to trauma. Let me explain. Cynicism towards others is a place where shame has so robbed you of joy that you have now turned him in like, the world is against me. I can't trust church. I can't trust people. That love is dead, whatever. This is the outcome of untended to trauma, shame that has really worked its way. And now you're stuck with cynicism and bitterness. The other side of that is then contempt or hatred towards yourself. This is the outcome of shame. Now, what we do in church, and these are what I mean by mile markers, it was getting honest in that place. Okay, I really don't like me. If I'm being really honest, I really don't like me. And if I'm also being honest, I don't trust anyone. People are out to harm me and to hurt me. Now, this keeps me bound and stuck, right, in this place of bitterness. It was there, and where church often will go is into this place. They talk a lot about shame. So we look at shame and we want to go, okay, I don't want to hold shame. But what they don't understand is shame is the outcome of untended to trauma. So we have to almost work backwards. We have to look at the places where we are feeling contempt, hatred towards ourselves or others. We then move into the place of shame, how I got like where I feel that I feel like I was rejected from my church. So I feel shame. Now I hate the church. You see how that? But what we need to even go further into is the shame is the outcome of a place that is the core, it's kind of the top, the core place of wounding. When we can get to that place and understand what is driving the shame, we don't stop at shame. Jesus didn't either. Jesus went to the woman at the well. He sat with her. He began to invite her into really where she was, lonely, betrayed, rejected by her community. Then he identified her shame by saying, go get your husband. Okay, now she's like busted, right? Like, oh man, my husband is, I don't have a husband. And she half lies. She half tells the truth. Well, I don't have a husband. And then he gets savage, right? We think, oh my gosh, Jesus, you should have just said like, you love her, you're the Messiah. But he doesn't do that because he knows how the brain works. He knows how the body works. He knows how restoration works. And he looks at her and he says, go get I know you don't have a husband. In fact, you've had 5 husbands and the man you're with right now isn't a husband. And boom, this is like, feels like it's the most shame story, but it's not. Because what he's been doing is he's helping her name the truth of where she's at, engaging the shame or naming the shame, and now engaging the trauma. The trauma is this woman has been abused, neglected, betrayed by men after men after men. And now as a man, he's giving her what her heart always wanted, because trauma, in order for it to move through the body and not be embedded, it needs care and comfort.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.